Everyone, welcome to the Youth Investment Fund webinar. It's the second one that we ran. So we ran one last week. We're just running another one today, just to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions or kind of hear a bit more about what we're trying to achieve from the fund. Just a bit of housekeeping. So at the moment, like if you have any questions that arise during the webinar, then please just put in the question box and we can address questions at the end. It will be recorded, so hopefully you can have what we're saying as like a resource for you to use, and we also have the previous webinar recorded as well, so you can use both dependent on if there are other questions that have been asked in different sessions. At the end, I'll write up any particular answers to any questions that you've provided, asked about, and any answers on that, and we can send that round. We'll also send it round with a feedback form, so if there's any kind of feedback you have on the webinar, any information that we've provided, both on the website or on the webinar, it would be really helpful to kind of hear what you think about how we've delivered that information to you. Just to introduce everyone on the call first, I'll kind of structure the seminar in a bit, but Lara is here from Resonance, Michaela's here from DCMS, and Karen and Barry are here from NYA, the National Youth Agency. Sorry, I tend to talk in acronyms. We are waiting on Jed to represent Key Fund, and he's on his way. He might be able to make it, he might not. So I'll keep you in the loop with that. So the aim of the webinar itself is to cover the fund priorities, the submission process, and any other particular eligibility questions that you might have. What we're planning to do is to deliver webinars across the period of the fund to talk a bit more detail about the assessment process and other pieces of information that you might think would be helpful to discuss as part of a webinar. Now, just to introduce myself, I'm Jenny Smith. I am the customer manager at Social Investment Business, who are managing and coordinating the fund itself. So generally, the background of SIB is that we've been around for 20 years, delivering both grants and loans to the social sector. The structure of the seminar, we have Jed as well, so just to highlight, Jed's joined us from Key Fund. The structure of the seminar is first me providing a bit of talking around the fund priorities, what the Youth Investment Fund is about, the application process and when to submit. Then we'll move on to Michaela from DCMS to talk a bit more about what the fund priorities are, what we're looking to achieve as part of the Youth Investment Fund Phase 2. And then finally, we'll introduce you to the different partners working on the fund. So talking through the purpose and the roles of National Youth Agency, Resonance and Key Fund. So just to introduce the Youth Investment Fund, it is a £368 million fund, providing both capital and revenue to create, expand and improve the youth facilities across England. Now, what we're doing is we're delivering the fund as part of a partnership in which we all have individual roles to try and produce and achieve what deliver the fund priorities, basically. As I said, Michaela will talk a bit more about the fund priorities itself, but for the Youth Investment Fund, the submission process is an expression of interest form. So depending on what stage of the process you are, all you need to do is fill out a particular form and answer some questions on the EOI. The questions are available offline, so if you wanted to look and review what questions we're looking to answer from you, then you can look at that prior to the application. The one thing that I would just really stress is that we are only funding areas in eligible geographical areas. You can find, using a map on our website, what eligible areas we're using, and Michaela will talk a bit into how we chose those spaces in particular. The other things we're looking for, we have certain legal structure requirements, as well as what we are looking to fund is organisations that provide open access provision, and the funding itself will produce additional youth activities across the site that you're looking to develop. Now, just the key top line timelines that we might have. So currently at the moment, the fund is prioritising the assessment of large development sites, and also they need to be ready to go. So about to spade in the ground and ready. This doesn't mean that we're not accepting applications that are not necessarily as far in that journey, but it just might not necessarily be a priority on assessment in the first 3 months of the fund. We're currently in month 2. Now, the fund is running until 2025. So a key part of that is that the money needs to be spent by March 2025, but we are planning grant committees to run up until March 2024. So that should provide a bit more of a timeline of that. The key kind of message that I want to say is that the expression of interest form is really open for anyone at any stage. So it's really helpful for us to get an idea of who's interested in the fund, what pipeline we might have. And so if you are earlier stage, we might request less information from you, but it might not necessarily be that you move to assessment immediately. So those are kind of the top line things that I'm going to want to share immediately. And I think if I just pass you on to Michaela to talk a bit more about the fund itself.
Thanks very much, Jenny. Yes, so hello, I'm Michaela Brennan from, I'll try and avoid my acronyms too, from the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sports, Youth Investment Fund Policy Team. So the key outcomes that government is trying to achieve with this fund are really importantly to increase the capacity of the sector, all about additionality. Does a bid increase the number, the range, the quality of services that you as an organisation or as a group of organisations would be delivering? To deliver through youth work outcomes. So we don't intend to fund sport or art or other types of organisations, but we would fund youth work where that's actually delivered through sport or art, for example, and it's focused on the emotional, social and educational outcomes. Another key outcome is really to deliver value for money, to spend this as efficiently as possible and reach as many young people as possible. And if you have any funding to bring to that project, that would also strengthen that too. So we welcome any match. Sustainability is another really important outcome for us, both in terms of creating youth provision that will last in the long term, and also in terms of net zero as well, to provide buildings that are very environmentally efficient and very easy to run, which has obviously become very, very important in the last year or two. So a few words on the investment areas. So YIF is targeted across England, targeting the areas with the greatest need for investment and where existing provision is at its lowest. So we've chosen robust publicly available data sets, including not in employment, educational training, deprivation affecting children, and data on existing youth sector provision collected by Department for Education. And this we've chosen around the bottom third of England in terms of those metrics. And that's a mix of upper tier local authorities and more isolated pockets sort of at ward level that might often be overlooked. And as Jenny mentioned earlier, we do need to be really robust in terms of sticking to those boundaries. Whilst it might not always make sense in terms of where population centres might be, we really can't begin to fund projects that are outside or on the boundary or very close to an eligible area. And we are looking to support local government, bids from local government or commission partners or the independent VCSE sector too. But we cannot fund those organisations that are working for profit or those that might be investing into the educational estate where that responsibility would lie with the Department for Education. And we're really keen for organisations to work together on a local level to create bids that are more robust and take into account, lots of different potential sites. Although each bid, whether it's an individual bid or whether it's a group of organisations come together, would be judged on its own merits. So yeah, thanks, Jenny. I'll pass back to you.
Thank you. And before we come to the partners, I just want to cover some common questions that we get through our inquiry inbox. So the first key thing is that the Youth Investment Fund grant cannot be used to purchase a site or a building. There is no minimum grant request, but we are expecting that the average grant is between 300,000 and 8.7 million, but you will not be immediately ineligible if you request for lower amounts. There is not a minimum length lease that you need to have to apply for a fund to develop that site, but it will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So it's likely that we'll take a proportional approach. So depending on the size of grant and the development that you're going to look at might shape on what lease length we expect to happen. there is a limitation on us funding fixtures and fittings. So if something can be taken out of the site and taken elsewhere, then we can't fund that. And any other sort of, and generally what it needs to be is part of a substantial capital build. Schools, colleges, and multi-academy trusts are not eligible for the fund. And there isn't a minimum number of years for an organisation to be established to apply for the fund, but the resilience of the organisation will be a key part of assessment if you're assigned to a relationship manager. So those are just sort of common questions I just wanted to kind of tick off. And now we'll just move on to the partners that are helping SIB and DCMS deliver the fund. So I'll go through each one and they'll introduce themselves and the background of the organisation and their role in the fund. So if I start with Lara, that would be great.
Thank you, Jenny. So hi, everybody. My name's Lara Bell and I head up our Developing Communities team here at Resonance. We, as an organisation, have been in existence 20 odd years, same as SIB, I think actually Key Fund as well, similar age organisations. And we describe ourselves as impact property fund managers. Our main role is to design and launch and run impact funds, particularly around key issues such as homelessness, community development, so investing in community homes, sports and leisure facilities. And also we support the social enterprise sector with loans and blended finance products. We're quite experienced in terms of development of capital projects, both through the community funds that we run and also through some of the other activities that we do through our property funds. And we have been distributing COVID relief grants over the last sort of couple of years alongside some of the good partners here with us today. So both investors and sort of grant assessors. In terms of Youth Investment Fund, then we'll be supporting SIB and Key Fund and National Youth Agency across the Midlands and South West regions predominantly. So we will have a team of relationship managers based in those geographies ready to assess bids and help applicants get through those processes. And we'll be involved in both the assessment and the post-approval processes, supporting the rest of the consortium. I think that's me done. I shall pass over.
Thanks, Lara. Jed, you're up.
Thanks, Jenny. Sorry I was late. There was a big crash on the M1, so that was as I was going between actually visiting the YIF applicant and getting here for the YIF webinar. So I'm Jed, I'm from Key Fund. We're doing a similar job as SIB and Resonance, as Lara and Jenny have already pointed out. Key Fund are based in the north of England. Our story is we've been going for a similar amount of time as both SIB and Resonance. Our story began in South Yorkshire in 1999. South Yorkshire hit by the collapse of the sort of coal and steel industries. We wanted to find ways of breathing life back into neighbourhoods in the north of England and to support new enterprises, create jobs, bolster these once proud communities with grants as it started off. And so Key Fund was formed by a group of like-minded social entrepreneurs and philanthropists. As the time's gone on, we've had grant money to give out, we've had loan money to give out, we've had a mix of both to give out. So our central mission is to provide finance, flexible loans, grant loan packages to help community and social enterprises to start up, become sustainable and grow. And it's not just about money, it's also, as Lara's pointed out, it's about providing the right kind of support to help our investees and grantees and give them the best possible chance of success. So where we come in is we invest in community and social enterprises that have traditionally been excluded and are probably furthest away from the market in terms of grants and mainstream finance. So a lot of the stuff we do is organisations that have been turned down by banks, turned down by building societies. So we're quite used to working with organisations that have been overlooked by traditional sources, I think is probably where the way we'd phrase it. Again, we've got a long experience of working on capital projects, we've got a long experience of relationship management. the offer from Key Fund is very much going to be similar to as Lara set out for residents. We're looking at after the northwest of England, Yorkshire and the Humber, and sort of Lincolnshire and out in the east of England that you wouldn't call the south. So we're going to have a team of relationship managers who are going to be able to help organisations with their applications and what we're looking for from a great assessment. The thing that we said in the last webinar, which I think is really useful, is SIB and residents and NYA and Key Fund and everyone else have loads of resources on their websites. We've got a toolkit of resources on our website, which helps with things like legal structures, looking at finance, looking at capital build projects, looking at how much things might cost per meter squared. So the types of things that will probably be useful to YIF applicants. So I'll put that in the chat box in the Q&A. And yeah, there's lots of links to sort of SIB, residents, NYA resources too. And I'll hand back to Jenny.
Thanks, Jed. And I'll share around in the summary what we shared in the previous webinar of all those resources and links. Barry, you've already unmuted, so you know what I'm going to say.
ready to go. Hello, everyone. My name is Barry Williams. I'm Deputy Director of Operations at NYA. Karen has also joined the panel because Karen has led on the quality practice framework that I'll be talking through later. So any expertise questions will quickly flow to Karen. But I've led on the Youth Investment Fund from day one. I'm just going to talk through the process that you will go through if you apply for the Youth Investment Fund from our perspective. NYA lead on the youth pillar, the three elements of that. So we want to make sure that quality youth provision, it takes place in any provision that receives youth investment funding. So that's the first element, and I'll talk through briefly what that looks like. The second element is ensuring that young people are central to design, development, and decision making. And that's from a perspective of our perspective from a youth investment fund, that we have a youth panel, and lots of aspects of the work that we've done have been designed with young people. And again, I will talk in a bit more detail about that later on. And the third element is ensuring that the wider sector is engaged with youth, whether that's raising the profile of youth, making sure that people understand what they can apply for, who can apply, and how they do that. And we've got some support around that as well. So I'll talk a bit about the quality practice review and what that means for if you go through this process. This is a relational process. It's a developmental one, and it's progressive as well. So as I talk through it, although it's as assessment at the base of it, it won't necessarily mean that it could delay your progression through the grant process. This process will carry on beyond that. So it's important that people are honest and open about when they go through this assessment. The first stage you'll come to is if you get through the EOI, you will do a first stage self-assessment, and that will be submitted to a quality practice panel, which is made up of professionals, youth work professionals that have expertise in assessment, and a youth panel that have been specifically recruited and trained for this process. Those assessments will go to the assessment panel and the grants committee. As I say, whatever the outcome of that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll delay your progression. There's a RAG rating that we use, and as long as we don't pick up any real concerns, we will work through beyond the grants committee's once you've gone through that grants committee. So it is that progression that we're looking for. If you're successful with getting through the grants committee, there is a second stage to self-assessment and a development plan that you'll create. That will come back to the quality practice panel, and they will give you feedback, and you will have your final version of that development plan. That development plan will form part of your grant agreement. So that kind of two-way process is really important, that you feel comfortable that you can deliver that. But we have lots of support online, which we'll share following this webinar, that will take you through this process and the development plan process. Once you finish the development plan, there's a final process that you'll go through, which is the quality standard statements, which demonstrates the journey that you've been on, that those practices have been embedded. That could take 12 months easily to go through that process. So it is a progressive process. And the themes that those are based on is youth participation, governance and leadership, and youth work practice. So I'll talk a bit about the youth panel and how that come about. We recruited a design group that have expertise around assessment to support us in developing both who should be on that youth panel, what the makeup of that youth panel should be, what they should assess as part of this process, how they should assess it, and then they helped us develop the training and the methodology and process in how the youth panel will assess it. So we recruited 20 young assessors between the ages of 16 and 24. They will not only be paid to do this, so they'll be paid for 13 hours a month to work on this program, but they'll also each have a personal development program developed with colleagues at NYA. They are geographically spread and diverse in terms of range of experience, but as well as backgrounds. So what will they be assessing? So we talked about 2 panels assessing. Well, the young assessors have a specific area that they focus on, that they assess, and that is that's section B in the self-assessment, and that is answered by young people from your provision and assessed by the youth panel. And the 3 areas that they'll focus on, which is commitment to good youth engagement, so youth participation, whether you've got it embedded already or whether that's an area that you need to develop. The second element is how you have needs assessed the needs of young people in your community and how you involve young people in that. And the final section is around how you make sure that your provision is inclusive, equitable, and open to all young people within your community, and how you work with young people to devise that. Moving on to sector engagement, what we've done with that. So we've done a whole communication and marketing plan strategy to support the promotion of youth, and I think that's been really successful, working with partners to get that information out there. We've also recruited and coordinated a sector expert panel to help inform sector guidance and support that we're providing, but equally other partners are providing as well. And that's made up by a number of representatives from national organisations, uniform sector, and regional youth work units, and organisations that have equity and diversity as their specialism. So that's us in a nutshell. That's the work that we're doing. I just thought it'd be really useful to go through that process. But as I say, the information is on the website, and we can, and equally, we've got an inquiries email that if you need any more information. Back to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Barry. And I think hopefully in the future, in other webinars, we can cover more details around not only the youth assessment, but also other areas that you'll be assessing on as we go through. So if I just answer, we only have 3 questions, so maybe this is going to be a very quick one. So if we start with the most recent one, but if there's any more, please just add them in while we're talking. So the first one is who is looking after the North East? So I think I can answer that it's social investment business. So what I didn't mention at the beginning, we've covered a lot of the areas. We've covered a lot of the areas of resonance. So SIB are covering London, the South East, and the North East as well. So we're managing, we have a number of relationship managers to provide that similar role that Resonance and Key Fund are doing, but in those particular areas. The next question is around whether we could provide a spreadsheet or a list of eligible postcodes beyond our map. I think this is something that we can do. So it's probably something that we can go away and provide, and also update on our website if it's another thing, if people don't necessarily always want to use the mapping tool, even though I do think it's very clever and lovely. But I can imagine with more postcodes, it's not always that fun. And then one of the questions is around what do we consider as large? So at the moment, I think this was kind of when we're discussing, we're prioritizing large ready to go organizations. So at the moment, there's no hard and fast rule what we're doing. So generally they would be definitely above the 300k threshold of what we're expecting those large grants to be. But I think a lot of it is dependent on what our relationship manager's capacity is at the moment, and also how ready to go the organizations are. So we might have submissions of grant applications that are over 1 million, but if they're still in their very early stages, then we won't prioritize that in our initial assessment at the moment. Does anyone want to add to that, or are you happy with that? Oh, perfect. Okay. So the other question is, can funding cover staff salary? So there is an element of revenue funding alongside a capital grant. So the first thing to mention is that we cannot provide revenue funding without a capital grant alongside that. The revenue grant can cover staff salaries. It needs to be spent within the period of time before March 2025 alongside the capital grant, and it can cover a range of provision of while you're setting up the site and the building works that's covering, but also any additional capacity that you might need to kind of structure the new services that you're providing within those sites. I just want to reach out to the panelists if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I think that covers it well, Jenny. But I was just going to say it is worth labouring on that point about it can't cover core costs and staff salary. It's got to be complementary to projects. So I think, yeah, it's not revenue only.
Great, thank you. I think we've answered. There's another question around revenue. Hopefully, that covers that. The question around, can capital funds be spent on council-owned buildings? The answer is yes, it can be. We have, as Michaela mentioned, we also accept applications coming from local authorities, but also if you are leasing a site from a council building, you can look to develop that. Speaking to someone prior to putting in an expression of interest. So can you speak to anyone in detail? So the answer is yes. So at the moment, there is an inquiry inbox that I can share in an email following up, yif@sidgroup.org.uk. Generally, what I suggest is to email that inbox, and we can kind of allocate who might be best to speak to. Dependent on the area that you're in and dependent on the capacity of our partners, it might be helpful for you to speak to Jed or Lara, who know their areas better. But also just more practical questions around the application form, which I can accept can be a bit of a minefield dependent on what stage you're at. We're really open to, so yeah, definitely just pop an email to that email address and we can follow up. Now, this is a good part. The question I'm not sure of the answer to, so maybe it's will YIF support the development of Duke of Edinburgh delivery? I don't know if we might need a bit of context for that question, but Michaela, I can see you moving.
Yeah, I can come in on that one. So the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, we do actually fund Duke of Edinburgh through another one of our revenue streams. So I think it would be very unlikely that the Duke of Edinburgh would have its own purpose-built facilities. Obviously, a facility that might be used by those groups, you know, where that belongs to another organisation or where there's a partnership perhaps. But I don't think that would really fit within the criteria for this fund.
Thanks, Michaela. The next question we have is typically how long does the whole process take? So in terms of receiving the fund, and what is the time frame of spending? So I think this could be very dependent on a case-by-case basis. So we are in the very early stages of the fund, so an average timeline we don't necessarily have right now. We are planning regular grant committees, but I think a lot of it will be shaped on how ready you are, so how quickly you can provide that information to the relationship manager to undertake that assessment. As I mentioned previously, it might be quite a long period of time between submitting your expression of interest to actually being assigned a relationship manager, in the sense that depending on our capacity and our current priorities, you might not necessarily meet that priority concern at the moment, or we just might not have capacity to undertake an assessment immediately. Lara, Jed, do you want to speak to that at all around the timeline?
Well, timeline bit, Jenny, I was just going to say, chipping in with it's March 2025 for the ticking time bomb deadline. So, you know, that's the time frame of spending for everyone. So I probably haven't got much more to add than that, because that should fix everyone's mind on that timeline, I think. Lara?
Yeah, nothing else to add, really.
Okay, so if we answer the question around what level of match funding are you looking for? So I think this, generally there is not a minimum of match funding that the grant needs to be provided, or we need to provide, or an applicant needs to provide. But Michaela, do you have anything to kind of mention on that kind of expectation of match funding? What would be a preference?
I suppose I would just reflecting on another comment there, that volunteer time as well, you know, is perfectly acceptable as match funding, and that we recognise that in investing in the areas with least existing provision, that match funding, gift in kind, might come in various forms. So we haven't set any kind of threshold there, a minimum level, but obviously the more resource you have, the more the stronger a bid would potentially be too.
Okay, thank you. There is a question here about how much money is allocated to different areas or counties. The key thing is there is not a provision of a certain amount of funding to each area. Michaela, I'll just look to you on kind of how you want to approach that question.
Yeah, absolutely. So we certainly haven't allocated funds per area. Value for money is a really key bit here. If there are lots of strong bids coming through in certain areas, we might expect more urban areas to receive more funding if more bids come through and they're reaching more young people. So yeah, we're certainly not putting any numbers on that at this stage, and it's the quality of the bids that will come through and the reach that will really make the difference there.
Lovely, thank you. So there's a question from Nadia. We are looking to develop an all-weather pitch and small stadium to expand our current youth club. We have started a planning permission process to see if it would be requested or accepted. Would we be too early of a stage to apply? So the age-old question of when to apply for the Youth Investment Fund. The answer is no. So what we're encouraging organisations is to apply when you're thinking about applying to the Youth Investment Fund. You don't need to have planning permission in place to apply for the funding. Dependent on how far away you are from being ready to go or starting procurement, we will be asking particular questions about the site. So that would be whether you've appointed an architect, whether you've applied for planning permission, whether you thought about building regulations. That provides us with a better idea of exactly where you are in the design process. And in that opportunity, you'll be able to state that you're awaiting planning permission, to like the outcome of the planning permission. So as long as what we're trying to do is provide opportunities for you to kind of state where exactly you are in the process, and it won't immediately rule you out. And the next question is around professional fees, i.e. architect, project management, accounted for within this funding. So is it part of the capital grant? The first thing I just want to make clear is that unfortunately, retrospective costs that you may have already spent prior to the grant agreement can't be provided as part of the grant. So we can't fund retrospective costs. So that's one part of it. There might be a place where you need project management to deliver that site building that can be included in those costs, which is kind of those core costs as part of a revenue grant. But that retrospective stuff, so the work that you might be doing prior to the submission of your EOI, cannot be retrospectively funded. So if we move on to the next question from Luke, so how does it work if that asset is currently under an education remit? So I think that's kind of what I touched on earlier, that organisations that are delivering alternative education provisions, or schools or universities, are not eligible for the Youth Investment Fund. So that's just something to be clear about. Do any of the other panelists want to kind of step in on that or add anything more?
I'd potentially add on that, absolutely, just get in touch with SIB. I mean, if there's any kind of asset transfer that might be involved, you know, that there might be cause to talk to SIB about a specific case. But overall, if it's going to remain in the educational estate, then not likely to be eligible.
Thank you. Now, can the building house organisational staff, so admin or service leads? So there is not actually a minimum provision of youth service activities in the site that you're delivering. As part of this, it will be assessed. So what we are looking to do is through the Youth Investment Fund, we're looking to expand additional youth activities. If the site itself is majority used for kind of background work or is solely used for that, then we can't fund that because that doesn't necessarily directly produce additional youth activities. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will only fund sites that only provide those activities. And if there are spaces in the building that will be used for other community activities or for other organisational staff, that's not a red line. It will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Does anyone want a second on that, or? Oh, I'm bossing it. Okay, so the next question is, does the amount of grant we apply for need to relate to the size or turnover of the charity? So can an organisation with 200k, which owns and runs a youth facility, apply for a 1 million plus grant? So the first thing to note is that we recognise that to develop a big site or develop any site, it will require a large grant, and that's why we're considering that an average grant amount will be between 300,000 and 8.7. So there is likely that there will be organisations with smaller turnover that are requesting quite large grants. However, we are taking a proportional approach. So dependent on, it will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So dependent on what the size or what the turnover is and what the grant is, that will be what we'll be looking at, because in general, the assessment is looking at the resilience of the organisation. So whether an organisation can take on that grant, take on that project and that size, do they have the experience, the governance to be able to deliver that project? And so that's all of the areas that kind of it will be looked at as part of the assessment, and isn't necessarily always a deal breaker as part of eligibility. Obviously, there might be more extreme cases, so not necessarily having a 200,000 turnover, but maybe aren't currently producing a turnover and then requesting a £1 million grant. There might be sort of a threshold that will be too far, but generally it will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Does everyone agree, disagree?
No, I think that's great, Jenny. I think it's spot on, but I think, yeah, there's in asking the question, I don't think it necessarily relates to size turnover of the organisation, charity, social enterprise, local authority, or whatever. I think it is, as you say, it's absolutely key is resilience and value for money are the things that we'd be looking at. So yeah, I can see why the quantum there is referenced, but yeah, I think it's again, it's back to that point on resilience of the organisation delivering and value for money in terms of the reach.
Lovely. And then a question from Charlotte Dean. We've already submitted our EOI, but are not ready to start. Do we just get back in touch when we have architects plans? So the answer is yes. So if there is, if you apply and you're deemed eligible, but not necessarily ready to start immediately, and you're continuing to do work in the background, that's great. And generally what we're looking to do is getting back in touch with those organisations after 6 months. But if work progresses very quickly, or whether you feel that you're ready to start, then all you need to do is pop an email to the inquiry inbox, and we can have a quick update and see where you're at, see if you are ready to go, look at our capacity as relationship managers to review the project, and then go from there. So it's really, really open for you. If you just want to even share an update on where you are, that's really helpful, because then we can update our records and just continue and understand where you are on that journey. So a question from Dave Usher is, can we start on early phase of the project if alternative funds are available? So this is a question that I've had recently in inquiries. So almost the role of, if you already have a capital project underway and you're looking to develop and use youth investment funds almost to top up that project, this is something we've been discussing, and it's not necessarily a deal breaker, so we don't necessarily we aren't necessarily against that. The key thing, what we need to still look at, as we've mentioned throughout, is how the Youth Investment Fund is contributing to the additional youth activities that it's producing. So it may depend on a case-by-case basis. So we don't necessarily need to fund the whole project, and that is where match funding comes into it as part of that. And it's a valuable thing to see match funding. But it is looking at see what will the Youth Investment Fund grant in particular, and is that producing the additional youth activities? Why has other funding not been raised up to that point, or has money been run out? You know, questions like that will all be part of the assessment. Does anyone want to add to that? Okay, great.
I would just add, actually on the other end of that as well, if you have a project and you think that you might be able to get match funding and continue that project after March 2025, then that might also be a possibility. Whilst the YIF funding would have to be spent within that time frame, you know, if you have additional match and you think that you can use that at the back end of the project, please get in touch as well.
Lovely. Okay, there's a question on revenue costs that I think we've covered, but Jed, do you want to add any more of just like a great broader definition of revenue costs? I can see you typing.
I was just typing in. I was sending a message in with the link to the FAQs. So the revenue grant covers expenditures, which are the ongoing operating expenses, usually short term. As we say, we can't do sort of core costs and running costs. So it's the as part of YIF, revenue funding can only be provided alongside the initial capital grant. So I'll put in the chat box the longer answer and the link to the FAQs.
That's great. There's a question for NYA and the youth assessment process. So is the application process by written bid, or is there, this actually, or is there any scope, it sort of crosses a lot of line, is there any scope for video submissions, particularly just to demonstrate the extent of youth involvement and bid being youth-led? So it sort of speaks to what you're doing. Barry, Karen.
Do you want to answer it, Karen? I can answer it if you want. So the question was about different ways of submitting. Yes, so there's an opportunity part. I didn't mention it, but in section B there's an element where you can upload a video, and if you want to do it in a different way, or the young people don't feel comfortable in submitting in a certain way, we can have a conversation about how that is submitted. So if you want to do a video, audio, that'd be really useful. And we've had a couple that have come through already. So yeah, anything to add, Karen?
No, I think you've covered it there.
And also just whether there's, so I think that's like a key provision of demonstrating the youth-led additionality and youth involvement. If there's any other, if there's like any challenges, I just mean more broadly, of like accessibility of the EOI, or if you kind of want to submit the EOI differently, or you want to do it over the phone with someone, or anything that's like needed for anything else, or there might be a certain reason, then please just get in touch. So I'm just going to cover 2 more questions before we go. And as I mentioned, I'll go through all of the questions tomorrow, and we can send out the recording of this webinar, and we can also just provide any sort of like contact details if you have any other further questions. So just on there's a question from Monica, which is, what is the minimum reach? So how many youths per week, per month, per year? So just as a starting point, there's technically no minimum reach for youth activities. However, it will be a key thing that we'll be looking at assessment. So I think there's a number of factors of how populated the area that you're delivering the services, other youth provisions in the area, and et cetera, and all of that falls into what Barry was talking about, the youth assessment, but also I think will be reviewed as an assessment panel as a whole. Michaela, do you have any comments around youth provision?
Yep, I would absolutely agree with what you said, Jenny. DCMS overall, looking to reach at least another 45,000 young people with the fund overall. So whilst we have kind of a high level target, that doesn't translate to a minimum, and yeah, very subjective depending on the application.
Lovely. Okay, and I think the last question that we can cover from Ellie is putting in disabled facilities into an existing building in order to deliver SEN youth provision as eligible. Is it an eligible application? Now, the first thing is, yeah, so the refurbishment renovation of a building is definitely eligible. Generally, what we do see is that by embedding disabled facilities into a building does help provide additional access and provide more additional youth provision. The key thing I just want to highlight is that we are looking to support organisations who are open access. So more specialised support, specifically for SEND youth, is more limited, whereas what we're actually looking to do is to ensure that all local young people in the area can access your resources, not just through referrals or other avenues, but if they wanted to join, they could join. And also this is openly advertised to across the community. Is there anything else anyone wants to add to that? Loving it. Okay, cool.